Our next speaker is Bill Tietji. Bill is on the faculty at UC Berkeley and a cooperative extension specialist. He happens to be housed down in San Luis Obispo County and has a strong background in wildlife management. He will talk to us today about some of the opportunities for recreational income from Oak Woodlands. So, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you for about 25 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Rick. And at the start here, I'd also like to thank the several ranchers that I talked to get some additional information for this talk. They were extremely helpful. Also, a couple of academics, and names of these people will probably pop out during this talk. I am pretty much just going to give the basics. There's not time for too much more than that. Rick tells me from a survey from last week that some of you people, two of you actually, have hunting clubs, and 7 to 10 of you do some personal hunting, let's call it, on your property. You might want to think about expanding that. If I can, some of the information that's presented here today, perhaps will encourage you. That would be my hope anyway, to really think seriously about this. You can increase your income. This is important. You can increase your income while maintaining ecological values on your property. So some things that I will cover today will be to look at some of this potential, monetary potential. I'll talk a little bit about different kinds of operations. I'll go from simple to complex, and that theme kind of goes throughout this talk. I'll talk a little bit about some of the basic needs, let's call them, insurance and marketing, and then I have a brief case study. So let's get started. First, there's a lot of potential out there in terms of clientele. There's over 250,000 hunters in California. And importantly, fully a third of these hunt solely on private land. So you ranchers out there, fully a third, about 100,000 ranchers or clientele, potential hunters, are out there to you to encourage to be on your land. To put that a little bit different way, like Rick said initially, I live on the Central Coast. And on the Central Coast, there are about 30 million people in either direction, north or south. The people aren't on the Central Coast, but within about a 4-hour drive, there are approximately 30 million people. So lots of potential clientele out there. People are interested in some of the numbers on some of these game animals. Really, the best is, as far as, especially if you have a small amount of land, would be waterfowl. The most income per acre can be gotten from waterfowl. I'm giving this talk from Davis, and of course we have the rice farming in this area. This might be really something, if any people out there listening that live in this area, you might give that a shot, so to speak. Turkey hunting, $500 a weekend perhaps. Bigger game, bigger dollars. Of course, you need a bit more land for that. For example, a 4 or 5 pound buck, up to $1,500. A trophy feral pig, trophy being something with 2-inch tusks or more, $1,000. And of course, the elk is kind of the prime of all of them. $10,000, even up to $15,000 for a bull elk, $3,000 for a cow. It's probably, well, okay, first, you have a lot going for you with the Oak Woodland. It's the most rich in terms of wildlife diversity of any major habitat types, and of course including the game animals. It's that way because it provides such a rich habitat for them in terms of food and cover, habitat being food, cover, water, and just simply space. And one of the ranchers I was talking to said that also within that food, cover, water, and space, you should just include protection, especially with all the land use activities and anthropogenic things going on out there. we need to provide some protection for the animals. And of course, your ranches do that. Another way of thinking of the income, other than the value of the various game animals, is to think about the value per acre. On average in California, a hunting business or enterprise can get $2 to $20 per acre income. That's net income. And the relative proportion of income on your ranch, say relative to wood cutting or relative to firewood cutting, goes up actually as the quality of the land, let's call it quality of the land, goes down. In other words, on poor range, you can actually gain a greater percent of your income, total ranch income, from hunting. This is a graph that Rick did a number of years ago. On the left axis there, you have dollars per acre, and you can see that on the right column on the graph that's good range, but look on the left one, poorer range being that, you know, it might be hard to fence, it might be real rugged, might not have very good distribution of water and so forth. You can get up to 30 to 60% of your total ranch income from hunting. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but squirrel hunting, for example, a guy that squirrel hunts, 17% a rancher on the Central Coast gets from that particular activity alone. So if you have your property, take good care of your property, it certainly has potential for hunting, and hunting can increase your income. A cash cow, if you will. And the sustained income, that sustained income could help keep your ranch in the family. So now let's look at some of the different levels of enterprises, let's say. There's a number of ways of going about this, and I've called this simple to complex. And I have the two levels of activity here on this particular slide. On the left is the more simple approach, and on the right, of course, is sort of the fancier bells and whistles, wine and dine them approach. The approach that you choose depends on how comfortable you are with having people on your land. It depends on how much control you want over the enterprise. And it depends, of course, on the amount of land that you have. Choose activities that suit your resources and your family's interests. And now in the next couple of slides, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each one of these approaches. First, more simple. And first, if being simple or having a simple hunting enterprise, if you don't want a lot of people, if that's really your reason for wanting to keep it simple, and that you don't want, you really would just as soon not deal with a lot of people on your property, maybe you have a rich cousin Eddie, and if you could get rich cousin Eddie to pay a fair amount, that would be a fairly simple approach. Or perhaps a hunting club that you have someone else manage. And that would actually give you very good control, too, of the number of people on your property. So to keep it simple, you might want to keep it simple, or at least you might want to start simple before you get into the more complex approach. It's like I said, is the wine and dine, maybe the 5-star package. Here you get into creating a sophisticated plan, maybe hiring a guide, hunting lodge, cabins, modern amenities, and so forth and so forth. With this approach, something that gets a little bit into advertising, think about what your property can provide that maybe your neighbors can't provide to your clientele. Think about how you might be sort of unique in fitting into the marketplace to make it potentially attractive to your customers. Now, another thing to keep in mind, that this kind of an approach, of course, will get you lots more gross income but also, of course, the costs are going to be higher. The point is here, too, that you don't have to go all out to make money from a hunting enterprise. Keep it in line with what your resources will support and with what fits in with the interests of your family members. It's very important to get the family totally on board. The next couple of slides I do what I call a little bit more fine-tuning of the operation. A couple of things that I'm going to look at in your fine-tuning might be to learn to know a little bit more about what's on your land and also how to enhance your habitat. First, let's look at what's on your land. First, simple to complex, a spotlight census. Fairly simple, but it can give you some very, very good information about the number of animals on your property. I'm going to use a deer, a popular game animal, of course, throughout this explanation of finding out what's on your land. From the spotlighting, you can, like I said, you can get the buck-doe ratio. From that, you can determine how many animals there are out there, the density of animals, which animals perhaps that you want to target or would like your hunters to target. Another fairly simple, maybe a little bit more complicated approach to finding out what's out there would be to look carefully at the hunter take with deer. You can do a fat index to get information about condition. You can age the animals fairly simply by, if you look at the picture here, by aging them from the teeth. From that, you can determine the condition of the animals and therefore also the condition of your property, the condition of your habitat. Should I do something to try to enhance that habitat condition? A little bit more complex yet, but maybe not as more expensive as you would think, would be the remote cameras. Certainly a way that's becoming more and more popular for doing research with animals, but also just common interest. A lot of ranchers are putting them out on their property just to see what's there. You might see some animals that you couldn't believe were actually on your property. In fact, in talking to one of the ranchers, he won't mind if I name him, George Work was born on his ranch. He's lived there for 74 years, and he's never seen a mountain lion. But he said he put some of these cameras out on the ranch, and after 3 months, he found that he had 3 different mountain lions on his ranch. He had seen sign, of course, tracks and some deer kills of mountain lions, but he had never actually seen the lions. So very, very interesting, and this also can get into the advertisement aspect. You can just imagine if you get some pictures, say, of elk or a trophy buck or that big trophy pig that we talked about before, send them to potential customers. I mean, that's going to get them really excited. They're going to say, hey, you can say, this is what I've got out here. What do you think? So they can also be an excellent marketing mechanism. Okay. I'm here on my sheets. Okay, moving along. Next, the habitat. And if this moves ahead. Michael? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Next, how do you improve your habitat? I can't stress the importance of water. Water for cattle, water for wildlife. Here I'm going to talk a little bit about the distribution of water. All of you have heard about these traditional water troughs. Ranchers put them out, of course, to provide water for cattle. Also, more and more, they're putting them out there specifically for cattle and for wildlife. You could use a map like you see here in the lower left of your screen to map where the different water troughs are located. That will help you identify open spots. Then you can take some water trough and fill in those open spots. About a trough about every mile is a good idea. This will help to distribute the wildlife throughout your ranch, and almost in effect will create additional habitat. And of course, as I've said, this is also great for the cattle. It helps to keep the cattle distributed on the range, perhaps helps keep them out of riparian areas, for example. And it's kind of a win-win situation all around. So certainly it's something to think about. And to carry this a little bit further, this same rancher that I mentioned before, George Wirt, from down on the Central Coast, has worked with NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, to develop a trough that's on the ground. George says God put water on the ground, in lakes, in streams. Why don't we put water in the ground instead of in a 3-foot tall bathtub trough-like mechanism? And he's dubbed this thing the ground level drinker, and is finding that this is even better than the conventional trough for attracting wildlife, and it also works very, very well for the cattle. Lots of different kinds of wildlife can use it, big and small. Okay, enough of that right now. In the next couple of slides, I'll talk a little bit about insurance and risk management. Something very, very important. The first thing is just to keep your operation safe. You could have a set of rules. Maybe don't mix alcohol in hunting, or a little bit on hunter safety, gun safety. Don't drive on the roads when they're wet. So as you see on the left there, first, make it safe, and that will reduce the cost of your insurance. For insurance, I could get into lots of details, but suffices to say here that there's lots of information out there. Insurance is available. You can get more information. You might want to visit with your insurance agent. Google hunter liability. Do a Google search. That'll give you a lot of information. And talk to your colleagues. And certainly the information is out there, but be sure to shop around. Marketing, another essential thing. Whether your operation is simple or complex, you're going to have to do some marketing. And if it's a simple way of doing it, of course, is word of mouth. Of course, you have to have an established enterprise, hunting enterprise with a good reputation for that to be effective. The computer, an internet, a website, almost essential these days. It's just a matter of our 2011 society that they get information from the computer. And a website, they're not so hard to do. You can do them yourself, or of course, you can hire somebody fairly easily, fairly inexpensively to do one for you. But something I wanted to mention, that a couple of ranchers that I talked to said that really the best advertisement they had was to engage a sports magazine writer to write an article for them. They said, be careful, the writer's not just after a free hunt, but an article can just be very, very effective. And that same one of those ranchers said that one of the writers that came out to his ranch to do an article on his hunting enterprise said that it was the most miserable day, the most miserable experience he ever had. It was rainy and it was cold, but it was also the very best and most fun experience that he had ever had. Okay, the case study. A rancher on the Central Coast has had a hunting enterprise for years and years and years, but he got the idea to expand, and this deals with expanding into a few other activities, by watching this movie, City Slickers, with Billy Crystal in it. And it just dawned on him. He and his wife said, wow, we can do that. So the rest is really history on this particular ranch. I'll talk a little bit now about the ranch and its philosophy. It is a cattle ranch. Has very good habitats, a diversity of habitats. The rancher has done some habitat improvement, again working with the NRCS as in a cost share program, has improved his riparian habitat, created more vegetation and so forth, better for wildlife. He has a wonderful philosophy. He intends to keep the ranch in the family forever. He has an easement on the ranch. Some of his quotes that he said. He's a very philosophical individual. Has said the land is our legacy. We sell grass for the cattle, and we sell scenery for our guests. And he's also said that ag tourism can help to, if ag tourism can help to keep the ranch in the family, so will the oaks stay on the land. He has expanded, like I said, into many, many enterprises. You might not want to get into all of these, but he has wildlife watching, photography, wildflower tours, hiking and camping, hay rides, cattle drives, roping, trail riding, you name it. And the family loves it, and it's been very successful for him. So you might want to think about some of those things. Just a couple of added values of hunting. It can be controlling pests, really pests of two kinds, I suppose. Animal pests or four-legged pests. Ground squirrel hunts, I said, can net up to 17% of ranch income. The other pests, the human pests, another pair of eyes and ears out there with hunters. They have a vested interest in making sure that competitors aren't on that property, that poachers aren't out there, and they can certainly help you in that regard. So finally, sources of additional information. There's lots of it out of there. You see us produce some excellent publications. One notable one is agritourism and nature tourism in California. It talks mostly about the non-hunting ag tourism activities, but much of the information applies to hunting. It was produced, written by Holly George and Ellie Rilla. Fish and Game has lots of information, publications, programs. A notable one there is the Private Lands Management Program, or simply PLM. It will allow you to extend hunting seasons. If you're from Wisconsin like I am, you might not want to hunt deer in August. That would allow you to extend the season perhaps into November. It also will give more generous bag limits. So Private Lands Wildlife Management Program, you might want to look into that. I mentioned the NRCS conservation programs, technical and financial assistance, WIP and EQIP, Wildlife Habitat Incentives Program, and Environmental Quality Incentives Program. There's a website there that you can look at. I also want to mention the guidelines on which this webinar is based. Page 68, it starts, chapter 6, which is what I'm basing a lot of this talk on. Some good information written by Greg Giusti et al. And also I want to mention in closing that a professor from Berkeley, Rich Barrett, is starting up a program, a research program, to get more information on the economics and so forth of hunting clubs. And he's working with a student on that, Luke McCauley. And if you would like to participate in that program, you be sure to contact me, and you could be part of that program. So in closing, a couple of things to keep in mind. The family, if you're starting a hunting enterprise or have one going, certainly your most important asset. Make sure that they're all on board. Customers, be available for them. I remember when I was in high school, one of my main hunting buddies, he had the dog, he had the places, and most importantly, he knew that we were going to have a lot of fun. And this was great. Habitat, remember, no animals, no customers. Have a plan, have clear goals, and be sure to market your products. And all of these things are important to keep in mind, whether your enterprise is simple or complex. That's it.
Well, thanks a lot, Bill. We did get a comment in from Roger Sternberg, and Roger made the important point that an additional benefit of having these wildlife photographs that Bill talked about for marketing the hunting program, some of these same photographs can be used in marketing conservation easements. And we'll talk more about conservation easements next week, but that's an excellent point that Roger made. So thanks for that, Roger.